On the panel today, this morning, you've all met and had a chance to hear from Cindy Blackstock and Mary Jo McVeigh. You may not have yet met Uncle Darryl, Farrell and Nerida Oberg, so I'd like to introduce you to them at this point. And I'd also like to really thank them because they didn't realise they were even going to be on a panel until a little bit earlier this morning. And I guess what I'd like to do is to thank, I mean, this has been quite an extraordinary conference, I think you'll agree, but it's also been quite extraordinary and unexpected events. And certainly with the terrible accident that Judy had yesterday, it's actually thrown a whole heap of things out. But people have just stepped up. And I think that's a mark of our sector, really. So just for those of you who don't know Darryl and Nerida, Uncle Darryl is from a local Aboriginal community member from the Gerinja Aboriginal community at Orient Point in New South Wales. He's held in high regard by both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal communities. His experience has seen him work in juvenile justice, in the Kakadu National Park as a park ranger for crocodile management, and he also worked closely with elders in traditional art restoration of sacred sites. His current work is with Anglicare in the Shoalhaven region as a Senior Aboriginal Programs Advisor and Aboriginal Mentor of the Little Black Duck program. Nerida Oberg is a psychotherapist who has extensive experience working with individuals, couples, children and families, having taught at leading tertiary colleges in Sydney for nearly 20 years. In 2010, in collaboration with Uncle Darryl, they began the development of a new program specifically designed to work with Aboriginal children and their families and community. This program, known as the Little Black Duck, is well established in Wreck Bay and Gerinja Aboriginal communities, is instrumental in providing cultural mentoring and child-focused play therapy from a mobile counselling service. The Little Black Duck presentation will be in the workshops this afternoon, but having Uncle Darryl and Nerida here was a perfect opportunity to bring the voice of a very specific current successful program onto the voice of the panel today. I'm going to come this way because I don't want to not look at you. So what's going to happen is I'm going to ask a series of questions, and really just whichever one of you would like to comment or add, and you might bounce off each other's ideas. And then we'll also, at some point in time, if somebody's got a burning question they'd like to ask the panel, we'll try and have some time for that at the end as well. We certainly heard from some of this very specifically in the keynotes this morning. But my first question to the panel is, what would be the experience, what would be the felt experience, whether you'd like to speak of the experience of a child or a young person or an adult or a family, if the impacts of trauma were seen and respected in their dealings with multiple service and support networks and systems? What would it be like from the inside out?
Well, for me, because I'm obviously working with children and young people, and I think the felt experience on the inside, if services were all akin to recognising what is seen as the unseen, and as opposed to just responding to the symptoms or the behaviour, is an experience of being held, and within that being held, it creates a safe place for natural healing in its own timeline to take place, rather than anything else that we all know through theoretical models of conception. It's also the experience of the children that I know that we work with is based on a true relationship that they're having with Uncle Darryl and myself, that for them feels like parenting in another way. So we're like surrogate parents. We're also, given our age, it's also like surrogate grandparents. and being able to hold that space. So yeah, feeling held, supported, feeling safe. And what comes to me is the child's experience is actually feeling cherished for who they are regardless of anything. That's my experience. Do you want to add any more?
I think what I'd like to add to that is, that the kids are feeling as though they're being understood and also respected. Respected is a big thing, or respect is a big thing in Aboriginal culture. And, that works both ways, not only with the Indigenous community, also with the non-Indigenous community. So a lot of the work that services go and do out in community, there's got to be a real emphasis on respect, because that's our culture as Aboriginal people, and we really thrive on that.
What I'm hearing in my head is the words of an adult survivor I've seen. Normally I talk about children, but I think this gentleman is probably very present to me this week because I've been having conversations with him recently. And he talked about his fear of being on his own because then he felt he wouldn't exist. And the utter terror of not existing. And as he was speaking and I listened to your question, he came straight into my heart. And I thought if we worked together in a way, exactly what our children were given, what you were saying, and then as they grow as adults, that they know no matter what happens to them, that there is that sense of who they are and that they can exist and feel themselves. Because what I've learned, as well as working with children, with adult survivors, is the terror of the aloneness, as well as all the other effects. And he actually voiced it for me this week. So that's what I would imagine it would feel like inside. Yeah. Cindy, do you want to?
The kids tell me it's when you don't matter as much as everybody else and you start to believe it. I think that's why it's so important that we do something, that we show them. You know, you can talk a lot, you can tell a kid lots and lots of times that you love them, but unless you show them, they're never going to truly believe it. And that's why we need to show them, not just by meeting their emotional needs when we can, when they've gone through a traumatic experience, but we need to show them by undertaking those actions that are necessary to hold the systems to account. We need to show them that we love them enough to fight for them, even when it's uncomfortable and sometimes difficult. But in those challenges, there isn't a loser. Like in our case, when the children win, the Government of Canada will too. It'll just take them a while to realize it.
Thank you. The next question is about where you actually currently see this happening and what that looks like. Where you actually see service systems and networks wrapping around children, young people, adults and families in a way that sees the impacts of trauma and the causes of trauma.
I suppose for us in the Shoalhaven area, you know, it's within the program that we run with the Little Black Duck program. We see a lot of that within there. You know, it's as a part of our program. I won't say too much on it because we've got a presentation this afternoon. Is, you know, we actually go out to community with our program, so we take it out to communities. They see it as also being separate from a lot of other services that come there, because, you know, community have ties with what we do. The Little Black Duck program was developed not only by myself and Nerida, but also by community, and that's who we're led by. I'm guided and led by my elders. So, you know, we sort of sat down and you know, talked to community about what sort of programs they want coming out there, and giving community ownership in the programs. Once you give community ownership in programs, it gives them a sense of pride, a sense of responsibility, and also a sense of ownership. You know, something, you know, services giving back to community. And like I said, you know, community are they feel more safe within their own community. So, you know, like I said, with the Little Black Duck program, we go out there where they are, where they feel safe. But, you know, with the mobile van that we have, we can also take them off community if that needs to be. And it's easily accessible, you know, the Little Black Duck van that we have. So, yep.
Just in answering that question, I can only talk from it personally and the experience. It's one of the reasons why we actually stepped into creating the program that we did, because when I arrived in the Shellhaven with a strong desire to work with Aboriginal children and communities in terms of transgenerational trauma and grief, it was glaringly obvious that Aboriginal children weren't in the service that I was employed with, and they weren't seeking any of the other services. So we actually created something that was aligned with both of our ideas on what needed to be provided in terms of safety and integrity. And to be honest, that really was created under the radar of the structure that exists in most organisations, and it's grown because of that. So we have only just experienced it in our program down there at the moment, hopefully to extend it.
I'll answer that question by saying where I don't see it happening. And I'm unfortunately again saying my personal experience in being in New South Wales for 23 years, I actually don't see it happening from the large government organisations and some of the larger NGOs. I see it in tiny moments of resistance in the community. And I like the way you said under the radar. Were you saying that purposely? Because that's why I'm seeing a lot of gorgeous stuff happening on the ground, which is going, under. So I'm not seeing it happening in the bigger organisations. Yeah. Same.
I'd echo what Darryl said. You know, am I the only one confused about what culturally appropriate means? I've been at this for over 30 years and I still haven't figured it out. What it always seems to look at is a mainstream program with a totem pole thrown in, and then it's culturally appropriate. And one of the things that we're trying at home, is that here? One of the things that we really have come to understand as First Nations people in Canada is one of the most important things taken from us from colonization was our ability to dream for our children. Other people began dreaming for us. They're still dreaming for us. Hardest thing is they're really good people. But they still really believe a lot more in their dream than they do in ours. They don't necessarily trust us entirely to look after our own kids. And the other piece is that sometimes we have conversations with these good people and we tell them we need to do things in our culture, but we don't let them in on what that looks like. So back home, we created this process called Touchstones of Hope, where we engage all community members, children, elders, the guy who mans the gas station, and we even throw in a few social workers. And the non-Aboriginal folks are working with our communities, and we ask a fundamental question. What does a healthy, in my community, Gitxsan child look like? And then what are the indicators of that? And where are we now, and how do we get there? And using that process, we've shifted the child welfare systems in Canada a bit. And I think it is really helpful because in our communities, there are people who still have parts of that dream, but we haven't had the opportunity to come together for that collective community dream that we take pride in, that we take ownership in, and that the non-Aboriginal social workers now know exists. And our experience with the non-Aboriginal social workers is a lot of them say, man, I wish we could practice that way for all kids in the country.
I'm going to detract a little bit from the plan, and I'm just wondering, is there anyone sitting there that's got a really burning question that you would like to ask? And I need a roving mic. Veronica.
Hi, I'm Tracy Willow. For nearly 3 years I've been out at Broken Hill. So Cindy, when you said you were bush, in Australia, like that's about 14 hours drive, maybe a couple of hours if you can get a plane. So firstly, before I ask my question of you, I've just sent an email back to, I work at the Community Legal Centre, and I've sent an email back to our lawyers who've posed an ethical injustice issue to me, which I've said, just listen to this amazing woman. She talked about silence and complacency, and then I named those 4 things that we need to remember, particularly about remembering. And I've put that to them and said, I'll talk with you when I'm back on Monday. But that's not my question. My question is that I've been out there for nearly 3 years, and some of us who think differently have combined together to create change and invite conversations in so many ways. I'm labelled the Blue Mountain woman who's come to Broken Hill. But you said you're from the bush, and I'm wondering around the project that you have been describing to us, the strategy, how have you captured the participation of those who are in remote communities and rural communities? How have you invited their participation so that their voice is truly heard? Because my experience is that when people want to talk to us out in Broken Hill, well, they only come to Dubbo, or they expect maybe that we'll come to them, or they just come out and tell us. They've already worked it out. So I'm really keen to know, how have you been really inclusive in what you've set out to do? Because I feel like I really need to hear that.
One of the things we do is when we're out talking to people, we give them something free that they can do in under 2 minutes that can be done anywhere in the world. I.e., all of you are going to sign up for the campaign. And from us in Canada, you're pretty remote. And the other piece is that 2 of our campaigns that I didn't have time to talk about, one is called Shannon's Dream, and the other is Jordan's Principle. We're both started by children in remote communities. And I'll just quickly share with you Shannon's story, maybe. Shannon Kustachin was born in Attawapiskat First Nation in James Bay, which is about a 7-hour flight north of Toronto. And her school sat on top of a toxic waste dump that was contaminated with 20,000 gallons of diesel fuel. The government of Canada said that they would bring up portable trailers as a temporary measure and then build a safer school. Well, they did that, but they put those portable trailers right on the playground of that contaminated school. And where this beautiful girl went to kindergarten was only a stone's throw away from that contaminated site. The children were continuing to get sick. The portable trailers never transferred into a school and were becoming dilapidated. The heat would regularly go off in winters that are minus 50 degrees below zero. And as Shannon said, she saw a lot of the kids dropping out of school because they had no hope. So she decided to do something. She decided she would go around and she would work with the other children to send letters to the Prime Minister. So you can see how she inspired these other kids. And then when that didn't work, she figured that she would do a YouTube video and send it out to all the kids in the world and see if any of them would write, because maybe they would listen to the non-Aboriginal kids, she thought. Because she always fundamentally, and I believe this too, I believe in the goodness of people in government. I just think they're trapped in a system that doesn't work. And she believed that too. And her video was picked up by thousands and thousands of kids all over the country. And she headquartered what became known as the Shannon's Dream movement from Attawapiskat, Ontario. And she had kids all over the country doing walks, coming over, sending her YouTube videos and everything else. So it's often those stories and that richness from those communities in the remote community areas that have the most to give to us. And I felt that even growing up in the bush, is that the most resilient people, the people who needed the least support from the government, were the people out there in remote communities, because we were used to taking care of ourselves. And there might be something useful that we could teach to the other kids. So I'd say involve your children in remote communities and being the stories of their own movement. Make sure you have something that's completely free and takes under 2 minutes to do, so any child can do it. For example, on Our Dreams Matter 2 Day, we have kids writing letters to the Prime Minister or drawing pictures or sending songs or whatever. It always has to be respectful. We teach the kids about respect, but we also talk to them about truth. And there's not even a cost for a stamp to send something to our Prime Minister. So kids can do it from all over the country. So I hope that answers your question.
So my question back to the panel, and I think you've already touched on some of these things, but and I'd invite you to get very specific, what specific changes are needed in our service systems and networks so they work better towards supporting the experience of trauma in children, young people, adults, families and communities?
I suppose for me, from an Aboriginal perspective, you know, it's all about listening to community and not thinking that you're the expert. You know, when it comes to Aboriginal issues or Aboriginal matters, Aboriginal people are the experts. It doesn't matter how many degrees you have. It doesn't matter how many universities you went to. When it comes to Aboriginal issues, Aboriginal people are the experts. So, you know, we need to keep that in mind when we're working with communities, particularly Aboriginal communities. And flexibility, you know, a lot of flexibility about your role or about your organisation's role when dealing with Aboriginal people. You know, you might have heard the old saying, you know, blackfella time. Aboriginal people don't go on specific times, you know, because lots of Aboriginal people might even have a licence or be, like we're saying, remote areas, no transport. So always be flexible when dealing with Aboriginal people.
And from my perspective in regards to that, I've often said that everything that I've ever learnt or thought that I knew, I've put aside to become irrelevant in many ways, so that I have a blank slate that can be filled with new learning from the community that I work with or the communities that I work with. And I happen to be I feel very blessed to be mentored not only by Darryl but also an elder from Jerrinja community. And even the teaching and the mentoring that Annie Grace facilitates with myself just blows my mind of thinking out the door. In that I've learnt to listen with different ears is the way that I describe it, and it's stepping into the Aboriginal world and walking alongside particularly the elders and hearing from them in regards like what Darryl is saying, not only what has happened in terms of the transgenerational trauma, but also really listening to the things that are important for them to be addressed and attended to, rather than anything that I might have constructed out of any of my university studies and projected in there as being it. So I have been in the years working with Darryl, thrown into a space of no man's land, which is then when I feel the learnings and the teachings, which I'm then guided to sort of modify a lot of my skills and my learning, and in order to put that into practice. So very much being guided what Darryl is saying by the teachings. If I've got a moment to tell a good story, because it was something that really touched me. We had the NAIDOC day at one of the local schools, and Louise and myself, being non-Aboriginal, were asked by and involved in the NAIDOC presentation at the school where we work, which was a real privilege to be included with the community that we're all coming in to facilitate the NAIDOC. Excuse me. And Darryl said that I was asked by one of the elders to join her in the storytelling with the class. And I thought that was quite an amazing privilege, because I was, again, this is a new learning for me on how to be with that. But after 8 rounds, we had 8 different groups that came through, and after 8 rounds of going through the Dreamtime story that was shared with the children, I was encouraged to help facilitate conversation with the children about what the meaning of that story and what it was bringing up in the children in terms of their own stories about it. And it wasn't until after the day that I had what I call a download, a complete realisation that not only was the the storytelling appropriate for all the children, but it was an indirect teaching for myself. And the story that she chose was very relevant to the mentoring that she's been giving me. And I just felt the experience of what a beautiful way to be taught. It's an indirect, respectful, subtle, very powerful teaching. But I also then was told by Darryl that not only was there that learning out of it for me, but also being a non-Aboriginal person, I am also aware of, critically aware of, I have to use the word ignorance of respect in regards to elders. So I very much operated in that space well as a bit of a gatekeeper to make sure that the storytelling with the children and all that was held in that respect. So it was, it was a privilege on many levels.
Are you sure you're looking for specifics from me, Maria?
Yes,
Okay.
I am.
Right. First specific is, do not waste your vote. We need to get rid of a government that supports racism, homophobic attitudes, and violence towards women and children. Do not waste your vote. That's your first specific. Remember that. We used to say in Northern Ireland, vote early, vote often. But anyway, perhaps not. Let's be first specific. And then I'll come down a little bit more into government and think specifically we need to change legislation. We can be led by our neighbours. In New Zealand, they have family law legislation which says the protection of children comes over and above the rights of parents to have access to their children. We need that here in New South Wales. That needs to come above. And then I'll leave the government alone for a wee while, just a wee while, and then come into society and on all levels of society that we need to promote a society which doesn't value violence against women and children and some of our men across the whole board. And that means us all standing up and speaking it when we see it, be it from entertainment or sporting, as well as in our family homes. Because we talk about the violence of families as if we pluck them out of society that doesn't promote violence and reward violence. And then I'll come closer into us as professionals. And specifically, I think we need to change our education. Right, I'm not just thinking right from kindergarten and high school, but particularly how we train our professional social workers and psychologists so that they don't feel they're superior and don't have this dominance over the families that we serve, because we are in service of our families. And I would like to see that that's the philosophy that we're trained in, is a philosophy of service to others. And then back down to myself, specifically, is getting me out of the way and getting my ego out of the way, and as Darryl said, listening to my people, whatever community they come from. So that's my specifics.
So I did child protection for 13 years, and I really believe in holding parents' feet to the fire for things that they can change. The problem is our system holds their feet to the fire for things they can't change, and that we refuse to change. And if I was a child protection worker today, I would at least try, when I go in doing that family assessment, ask myself that question. What can they actually change here? And then the other thing is, what am I going to do about poverty, poor housing, and substance misuse? And there's a great example from the United States, actually, where the US government provided only $15 million, which is a drop in the bucket in their economy, but it's more than what the Canadian government has ever done in this regard, so we got to follow their good example. And what they did is they gave child welfare workers the ability to do housing vouchers for a value of up to $14,000 for families who are going to go into child welfare care or who could have their kids reunited if the housing issue was resolved. And let's face it, we know that these families have multiple issues. It's usually not just housing, it's other issues. But what did they find when they spent that $14,000 on things like first and last month's rent, on filling the fridge, on actually getting the fridge to work, on buying a washer and dryer versus parenting programs? Well, they found that they kept 7,500 kids out of child welfare care, and they saved the taxpayer $141 million. So I think that's the kind of stuff that we need to get real about. I'd rather see a whole supply of washing machines in every child protection office to give away to people than some other things I think that we need to get into. The final thing is that I'm going to share with you a story for non-Aboriginal folks, because I've met so many caring non-Aboriginal people within government and outside of government. And I know you work really, really hard and you want to do the right thing. But some of you are really afraid of screwing up or of doing the wrong thing. So I'm going to share with you a little story. When I became the executive director of the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society, I was scared stiff. There are 633 First Nations in our country, speaking 50 different languages. And somehow, although I knew I would never master my own culture, let alone the diverse ones across the country, there was kind of this expectation that I would know it all. And one day I came from a meeting with the Department of Indian Affairs with 2 elders. Needless to say, we were all pretty stressed out by the time we got to the lobby. And one of the elders pointed to where they were having a ceremony, a prayer ceremony. She said, let's all go there and deal with that. That sounds good. So there was the elder hosting the prayer ceremony. And I knew how to stand in the circle properly. That much I had down, so I'm feeling good already. Until she brings out a basket of stones. I have never seen this before in my life. So I do what every good Indigenous person does. I pray that she goes to the other elders first. And then they will show me how it's done. But I think elders are like cats with people with allergies. They seek out the person in greatest need. And so there she is. She comes straight for me, right? But I'm sitting there, oh my God, I gotta apologize to my ancestors right now for whatever's gonna happen. And she's holding out the basket and she's smiling at me. And I'm smiling back. And I figure just calm, respect, be in the moment. And so I close my eyes and I open them and there she is like this. And I figure, okay, I even held myself back a few more moments. But then I couldn't take it anymore. I figured this is one of those situations where, you know, you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound. So I reached out my hand and I grabbed a stone that had a crack right down the middle. And right then when I did that, I knew I'd done the wrong thing, right? So again, being the caring, compassionate person I am, my next thought is, I sure hope Elder Jones screws up just like I did. So there's Elder Jones standing right there, because somehow when you do something stupid, it's better when you're in a company, right? You don't want to stand out in a crowd on that one. So I'm sitting there with my rock with a crack, and there's Joan. And I see the elder smiling back at her, right? And I think, oh, good, my chances are looking good here, because Joan doesn't look like she knows what to do. And she's there with the basket, and I see the silence again, and I'm thinking, oh, this is perfect for me. And then I hear Joan say, can you please guide me? I want to be respectful. That's the only thing you need to do when you work with the Aboriginal people. You don't need to be experts in our culture. You need to say, I want to be respectful, please guide me. Communities, the Aboriginal communities here in Australia already have the solutions. And they have ideas on how you can respectfully engage in those solutions to not only promote the well-being and the justice for Aboriginal people, but to make this a better country too. So you don't have to sit on your hands and worry. We're going to look after you. You just need to ask.
I'm going to come back to the audience for a moment to see if somebody else has a question. This might be your last chance. Veronica, there's a woman just up the stairs.
I still got it.
This isn't this. Oh, I'm Jen. Hi, everyone. I manage a community centre where I work with families with children 0 to 8 that's based within the grounds of a local primary school. So it's quite a unique setting. And I'm fortunate to be able to work with the parents and children. My challenge, I suppose, is how do we deal with teaching staff that just don't get it? You know, I feel like I'm regularly the voice for that child, but also for the family, saying, you know what, they haven't got that today. Other shit's happened. You know, and it's really difficult. As we were talking about before, kids in kindergarten being suspended that have got traumatic backgrounds from prenatal, you know, it's through pregnancy and all those early years, and we know the implications for those kids. But just having that lack of understanding that these kids can't just sit there and they're not going to respond that way, and kids that have been traumatised from birth do respond in ways that we just don't, you know, aren't normal to most children. Where do we go from there?
I'm going to cut to the chase and ask Darryl and Nerida to maybe comment on that, because I know their work has led them through some inroads around that. And I also invite you to go to Little Blackstock, because you'll learn a lot more.
In regards to our program and how we're working with that, I totally get what you're saying. I've been totally horrified when I've sat in classrooms to observe behaviour of children that have been referred to the program, and then the whole focus for me is then advocating on behalf of that child to the principal, and so that's a constant that we're both doing all of the time. The other thing is that Darryl has the opportunity to then offer cultural sensitivity training within the schools that's provided on professional development days, which is relevant to the local history as well, so it makes it more pertinent to the teachers that we're working with. But I'd have to say the greatest influence that we've seen is that it's our presence at the school, and it's acting as role models for the teachers in our relationship with the Aboriginal children. So we're available during the lunchtime and we're mixing with the children all the time. So I'm content in that role, that I'm just role modelling respectful relationship with children and very, very strong advocacy for them. Yes, that's part of the role. That's it.
Yeah, it's certainly a difficult question because I often, like Nerida said, I do cultural awareness training for Anglicare, all the services that we have within Anglicare. I also offer it for the schools and that, and you know, sometimes I walk away, I'll come back 2 days later, and like you said, you know, some of the teachers, some of the staff still don't get it. So you're continually fighting that battle. But I suppose for us and the Little Black Duck program, we're always there, we're consistent, and you know, we're not frightened to get up and talk to the principal or the teachers or whoever about some of the issues that we're getting back, because if anybody's going to tell you what's going on for them, are the kids. And they're going to be truthful, they're going to be upfront and tell you how it is. So, you know, and we're able to go back and advocate for the kids. So, you know, and that's what we need to do. And all I can say to that is just keep hanging in there. Keep being that mentor, keep being that spokesperson, because at the end of the day, we're all here for our kids.
And just on a note with that, because we've been in the program now going on 4 years and we're servicing the public school, so the secondary school, just in the last 12 months I've had the high school students who were in the program a couple of years ago coming into the service, but specifically to come and talk to us about teachers at high school, so that we can then go to the high school and advocate on their behalf. So it's encouraging the children as they get older to have the confidence to recognise what's not appropriate and to be able to, in a respectful way, call that. So there's a lot of training on that part and how to step up and speak up for the rights and stuff as well.
And just to add to that, it's also about giving the parents or the caregivers or the grandparents that confidence to also step up. because, you know, it's all well for us to step up for the kids, but it's even a lot stronger and powerful when you have the parents or the caregivers or the grandparents stepping up. So also making it a safe place for those people so that they can step up.
I'm just wondering if someone else would like to comment. And I was just thinking, as the question was being asked, if we think of teachers as a microcosm of all of us who are resisting the seeing and the feeling, and there might be some other responses.
Yeah, that was kind of what was in my head, was thinking about perhaps our teaching staff are also a traumatised population of what we're expecting them to do, again, what the government is expecting them to do on less and less resources. And then I was thinking about myself as a junior wee social worker and how I used to approach those problems. And I think I used to approach those problems from what we call the position of the wind. And if you know the story about the wind and the sun were arguing about which one had the most strength to take this person's coat off them. And the wind said, I can get the coat off the person. The sun said, first the sun said, let's see. And so the wind blew really, really strongly and really, really angrily and really, really forcefully. And of course, the person held onto their coat more and more and more. And the sun just very, very gently started to shine and warm up. And the person took the coat off. I used to be a bit of a blusterer as a younger social worker and try and change everybody. No, I don't. I think you have to change yourself, Mary Jo, number one. In the words of one of my great heroes, Mahatma Gandhi, is like, be the change you want to see in the world. And so I do a lot of, people that know me do a lot of work with schools and a lot of conversations with teachers. And I'm just going to love them into trauma-informed practice. Role model, as you say. I just, and lead by example. And particularly with principals. I want to talk to more principals and more boards of schools in that way.
I just saw a fantastic video last night from Beyond Blue about racism and how it actually happens. Because if you work in our field, no one here is racist, right? I mean, it's one of the worst things you can be called as a helping professional. We're beyond all of that. And yet that video really showed me how, in subtle ways, we all do it. And I think that that's something that everyone should watch in their professional practice. The other thing is they should have people like Jackie and the two of you in to do the training. And we need to not only ask people to change, we need to demand people change. And if they don't, then they get the door. I mean, that's fundamentally it. We're here for the best interests of children, not here for the best interests of social workers or educators. And if people cannot practice in a way that doesn't discriminate or harm children, then they need to find another place of employment. And we need to expect that of our colleagues and of ourselves. And the other thing that's really helping us in Canada is we're beginning to have mandatory education for all children in the schools about Aboriginal peoples. And the non-Aboriginal children are joining with the First Nations children to demand more of their teachers. And they are calling their teachers out when they see some of this practice. And that is starting to fundamentally change the education system in ways we've never seen before. So those social workers or whatever that have got their heads hanging low or that are saying, man, she's such a troublemaker, they're going to slowly move off. And thank God there are people like you out there who are prepared to stand tall in the wind for the kids.
Thank you. One final question. And what I'd like to ask, if there was one thing that you could impart into the minds of managers or team leaders, policy makers, those who have influence on driving collaboration, what would you want them to hear?
I've got one. I would love the message to resonate that when we throw the word flexibility around, that we need to be flexible in order to work with Aboriginal communities. I think that mainstream and non-Aboriginal sectors wanting to connect and trying to get that need to understand that the flexibility that is being asked would be experienced by them as radical change, and that's okay.
I suppose for me, change has to come from the top and work its way down. You know, we need to think about grassroots. They're the people that know what's best for them. They're the ones that should be making the decisions. Our Aboriginal community should be making their own decisions as to how they want to work and who they want to work with. And like Nerida said, flexibility around that, and also patience. You know, there's also got to be patience around working with Aboriginal people. So, you know, when you're going into community, don't expect things to change overnight. So they're the types of changes that I think need to happen.
One message from someone who's Irish? Holy cow. The reason we were given thousands of words so that we could use thousands of words. Okay, one message for managers, policy makers. Let me throw in the government as well. Okay, get out of your own way. Just get out of the way. Because when you're out of the way, that means your heart is open, and it's basically what you're saying. When your heart's open, then guess what? The community is there, not you.
I think all of us working with children need to have a Hippocratic oath. I think our firm belief in our own benevolence is dangerous. And I think that particularly comes out when we're working with Aboriginal people. Remember what I said is a lot of people want to work with Aboriginal people, but you want to use your own systems because you don't trust us. We could make a mistake. But as I said to a guy back home, I said, well, for thousands of years we survived our own mistakes, but we may not survive yours. You have to believe in us enough to do the right thing for our kids. And you need to let go of what you think the answers are for us. And you need to believe and join us in our dreams for our children. And it's not just what we're saying, it's what's coming out in science. I don't know if you saw the recent research article in the United States where a researcher reviewed child development models for First Nations and Native Americans and found out they're quite different than the Western model. And in fact, when you apply Western models of child development on Indigenous children, you do them a significant disservice. So just allow us to make our own mistakes. Thank you for looking after our kids for so long. We know you did it with a good heart. But it's our turn now.